Map balance has been a major issue in Dead by Daylight ever since it first came out. It feels like there hasn't been a single day without players complaining about it. Now, it wouldn't be fair to say the devs haven't tried to fix it at all. They haven't, quite a lot. And while it did make things a little better, globally nothing has changed. Why? The reason for this is actually quite simple. Most of their fixes have addressed the symptoms of the issue and not its root cause. So what is the root cause? Well, there are actually several. Let's start with the one I think causes the most problems: RNG. The fact that maps change from match to match can create a ton of unfair situations where one side has an advantage over the other. It affects almost every aspect of the game. Let's start with pallets. On average, a map spawns around 16 of them. But that's just an average. In practice, there can be a bit more or a bit less. In the first case, the map obviously favors the survivors. In the second, the killer. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. Of the total number of spots that can spawn pallets, about 5 are reserved for so-called jungle gyms. These are big maze-like structures made up of pallets and windows. The rest of the spots spawn filler loops. The game features a huge variety of jungle gyms. Which types you get in each specific case is determined at random. But the thing is, not all jungle gyms are equal. Some are balanced for both sides, like TNLs, where one window is relatively safe and the other is 50-50, while others clearly favor one side. For example, the 3-wall and what I call the perpendicular wall jungle gym. The 3-wall is practically unmine-gameable, while in the perpendicular wall, both walls are pretty mid. So if the game rolls the strongest possible jungle gym, survivors will have an absolute field day looping the killer, but if it rolls the weakest, their performance will be a lot more humble. Some jungle gyms come in 2 variations that also differ in strength. For example, the classic jungle gym can spawn with a window either on the L-shaped wall or the long wall opposite it. Both are strong, but the first variation allows for slightly more mind games than the second. With other types of jungle gyms, the difference between variations is even more noticeable. For example, in the 4-wall jungle gym, the pallet can spawn between 2 long walls, and in that case you get a very strong tile with multiple options. You can pre-drop the pallet and keep running, camp it and try to drop it on reaction, or run past it and chain it with the nearby window to get the full value from the tile. In the other variation, however, one of the walls is extremely short. The killer can literally lunge around it, which means that no matter what the survivor does, it will almost always result in a hit. Unfortunately, the game doesn't differentiate between all these variations and treats them as completely interchangeable when generating maps. RNG can even make the same jungle gym variation stronger or weaker depending on its orientation on the map. Take any jungle gym with a safe window. If it spawns with the window facing the edge of the map, it becomes partially isolated from other tiles, making it harder to transition into them. But if the same variation spawns with the window facing the center, you can do that without any issues. Normally when generating maps, the game tries to keep all tiles more or less spaced out. But sometimes the part of the code responsible for this hiccups, and some of them end up spawning too close to each other. This creates tight clusters of pallets and windows. Depending on which tiles we're talking about, these clusters can be just strong or ridiculously f***ing strong. A perfect example is a filler spawning near the shack. The shack is considered one of the strongest tiles in the game even on its own, but when paired with a decent filler, its strength basically doubles. It creates so many options for jukes and mind games that if the survivor knows what they're doing, by the time you catch them, you've already lost the match. But there is also a flip side to this. If pallets are packed so tightly in one part of the map, it means there might not be enough of them elsewhere. In the most extreme cases, this can create so-called dead zones, where there's absolutely nothing to work with. So if a survivor is unlucky enough to run into the killer there, the chase will likely be over before it even begins. Sometimes heals create dead zones. I think you're gonna agree with me that heals are not the most useful tiles in the game. Unless you have balanced landing, all they're good for is just breaking the killer's line of sight. When there's just one heal, it's not a big deal. The problem is that there can be 2, and they can spawn very close to each other, rendering a pretty big portion of the map practically unusable. In certain realms like Red Forest, there are special types of heals with 2 slopes, and they make things even worse. Nobody talks about it, but they actually don't have a single spot that's high enough to trigger balanced landing. So even with the perk, you're still gonna be absolutely defenseless near them. About 6 months ago, the devs tried to fix dead zones. You'd probably think they fine-tuned the rules for pallet distribution, but of course not. That would have been a way too nuanced solution for them. Instead, they went for a blanket buff, increasing the number of pallets on what they thought were the most problematic maps. To the surprise of absolutely no one, it didn't help. In fact, things got even worse, because thanks to the extra pallets, pallet clusters got even denser. But that's not even the funniest part. Believe it or not, that wasn't the first time Bhvr tried this approach. Back in 2016, when the game first launched, they were operating under the exact same idea. At that time, pallet density was so absurdly high that pallets were literally everywhere. To give you a better picture, go into a custom match on one of the classic maps and look at how many empty fillers there are. And now imagine every single one of them actually has a pallet. That's what it used to be like. On top of that, those fillers often spawned in pairs, which makes today's pallet clusters look like a joke. Even jungle gyms, which today only have one pallet, used to have two. But even with all that, dead zones were still very much a thing. In my opinion, that fact should have been a clear sign for the devs that simply increasing the number of pallets wasn't the key to removing dead zones. But I guess behavior is legally not allowed to learn from their past mistakes. Another example is generators. Normally the game places them so even the noobiest survivors can find them without trouble, but every now and then you'll get a spawn where some end up in such inconceivable spots that even experienced players might get a bit confused. At the start of the match it doesn't really matter, there are a whole 7 gens on the map, so even if you can't find some of them, you can still work on the others. But as the match goes on, the number of gens shrinks, and so does your choice of which ones to work on. This can eventually lead to a pretty nasty situation that I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. There's 1 gen left to complete, which means there are 3 gens remaining on the map. The entire team, including you, knows where only 2 of them are, but unfortunately you can't complete either, because they've spawned way too close together, making it super easy for the killer to defend them. The 3rd gen is somewhere halfway across the map, and if at least one survivor started working on it, the killer wouldn't stand a chance, because it would create a massive split. Unfortunately, RNG put it God knows where, so you have no choice but to keep pressuring the first 2 gens until one of you accidentally goes down, allowing the killer to snowball the entire team. But at least in this case, there's still a theoretical chance to win. Now imagine the same scenario, but all 3 gens are right next to each other. That's called a 3-gen setup. If you end up in this situation, it doesn't even matter whether you know where exactly the gens are or not. You're not gonna be able to finish them anyway. The killer will be circling between them so quickly that they'll interrupt you every 10 seconds, preventing you from making any meaningful progress. These days, 3-gen setups are less of an issue. Killers can still hold them, but not for very long, thanks to the gen regression limit introduced about 2 years ago. Gens can now only be damaged up to 8 times. After that, they become blocked for the killer, allowing survivors to repair them without worrying about losing progress. Initially, I had a pretty negative reaction to this change, because the game already had a ton of hidden rules and exceptions, and I wasn't sure we needed another one. But over time I've gotten used to it, and overall it doesn't seem that bad anymore. My only real gripe with it is that there is no way to track how many times a gen has been damaged through any kind of UI element. For example, the devs could have added small tally marks above gens that appear when you get close to them. The fewer of them there are, the closer you are to getting the gen blocked. Next up, hooks. Their map distribution isn't any better. Sometimes you slug all 4 survivors in one area and there are enough hooks nearby for all of them. Other times you can't even hook a single survivor, because every hook is miles away. That forces you to drop them so they don't wiggle out, which is just beyond frustrating. I mean, you've just won a chase. That's not always easy. Sometimes it's actually really fucking hard. So you should be guaranteed a hook state as a reward for your effort, unless of course you're dealing with a Sabo squad or some shit like that. But instead the game just spits in your face and denies you progress on your objective. The issue is often made worse by the basement. It comes with 4 hooks, and no matter where it spawns, the game often treats that as enough for that part of the map and doesn't place any additional hooks there. As a result, the basement is often the only place where you can hook a survivor in that area. But the problem is that it's not always reachable. The thing is, it often spawns inside main buildings, many of which are huge and incredibly convoluted, like the one on Green Pantry. So unless you down the survivor on the side with the basement entrance, you're never gonna make it there in time, which leaves you with no real option but to slug them. What's interesting is that back in 2018, the situation was the exact opposite. Regular hooks could spawn extremely close to the basement. For example, if it was in the shack, the game could easily place an additional hook right on one of its corners. On one hand, it was good, because it turned the basement from a necessity into more of a strategic choice. You'd hook survivors there only if you actually planned to play around it, and not because you had no other hooks in the vicinity. On the other hand, 5 hooks packed into one small area was clearly overkill. So I understand why the devs eventually moved regular hooks farther from the basement. Why the f they had to push it this far though is honestly beyond me. Moving on, we got exit gates. In the classic 4v1 mode, there are 2 of them. If by the time they're powered at least 2 survivors are still alive, it doesn't really matter where exactly they spawn. Even if they're on adjacent walls right next to each other, one of them is still guaranteed to get opened. All the survivors need to do is split up and go for different gates. The killer will be forced to pick one of them, while the other is free to open their gate and escape. But if there's only one survivor remaining, that's a whole different story. In this case, it's absolutely crucial that there is at least some distance between the gates, otherwise the survivor is cooked. The killer will rotate between the gates so quickly that the survivor won't even open a gate halfway. In fact, if RNG goes nuts and doesn't spawn a single object between the gates to block the killer's line of sight, they won't even be able to approach a gate without getting spotted. There are plenty of other interactable objects whose placement is RNG based. There's no point going over all of them, since not all of them have a significant impact on map balance. But there are a few I just have to mention. First of all, totems. Their spawn locations are directly tied to the effectiveness of hex builds. If they spawn out in the open, survivors will most likely get rid of all hexes within a minute of the match starting. Otherwise, they can easily stay up for the entire match. Second, lockers. Ask any dredge main and they'll give you a full-on TED talk about how important it is to have consistent access to them across the map. Otherwise, there are parts of the map you simply can't teleport to, forcing you to waste time walking there. The same goes for ranged killers. I've been playing a lot of Hunters and Trickster recently, and I gotta say it's super annoying when you need to reload but there are no lockers nearby. It forces you to move somewhere else, which often means giving up a strong position, like a hooked survivor. On top of that, locker density directly affects the strength of certain perks. It's one thing to deal with a head-on squad on Rotten Fields. That map barely has anything besides Scorn, so naturally lockers are pretty scarce there. And that's a completely different story on Midwich or any other map with dense locker clusters, because by the time you catch even one survivor, you'll have your very soul stunned out of you. Third, killer-specific interactables. For some killers, these act as the source of their power. For example, the Plague's fountains that give her the red puke. RNG can easily make them all spawn on one side of the map, so if for some reason you get stuck on the other side, you can forget about your power. Sadako and Xenomorph means suffer from this just as much. Their TVs and control stations let them travel around the map very quickly, kinda like Dredge. So just like Dredge, an even distribution of their interactables can make it difficult for them to control certain areas. A more recent example would be the pumps from the Blood Moon event. It's almost impressive how badly the devs fucked up their placement. Every other match, the game would place 3 of them on the same corner, literally 10 meters away from each other, and every time that happened a part of me just died, because I knew I was about to spend the next 10 minutes playing a walking simulator, hauling blood cans across the entire map. So what do we do about all this? The solution is actually as simple as it is radical. We need to abandon RNG completely and move to fake spawns. Yes, the devs would have to go through every single map in the game and manually position every object down to the smallest rock. But that's the only way to ensure maps are actually balanced for both sides, regardless of the character you're playing or the build you're running. This comes with extra several benefits. It would minimize the luck factor and make the game more skill-oriented, which is ultimately what you want in a competitive multiplayer game. It would also slightly shift the survivor meta by reducing their reliance on windows of opportunity. Right now it's the most used survivor perk in the game, which isn't surprising. There's no better tool for minimizing the impact of RNG in chases. With fake spawns, the perk would no longer feel mandatory. It would mostly be used by newer players who are still learning the maps, while experienced players would rely on memory and map knowledge. Next, it would eliminate situations where random objects spawn in awkward spots and block your path. For example, hooks love spawning right in the middle of loops, which makes survivors bump into them and allows the killer to close the distance for free. Sometimes two objects like rocks or boxes spawn too close together, leaving only a small gap between them. It looks like you can squeeze through, but if you actually try, you just get stuck and trap yourself. The worst case is when the gap is big enough for survivors but not for the killer. That creates an extremely abusable loop where catching a survivor becomes borderline impossible. Some people might argue that fake spawns would make the game boring. After all, map RNG adds variety, which is important for session-based games like DBD. But the thing is, that logic is outdated. It made sense back in 2016 when the game only had 14 maps. They repeat it way too often, and if they had fixed layouts, they would have gotten stale very quickly. RNG helped mask that, giving players the illusion that they were playing on a new map each time. Today though, we have over 40 unique maps. In theory, that's enough to play for hours without seeing the same one twice, which makes map RNG completely redundant. The only things fake spawns wouldn't work for are totems and the hatch. Yes, I've mentioned that totems suffer from RNG, but fake spawns would straight up kill them in the long run, because eventually survivors would learn their locations by heart and start cleansing them even faster than they already do. The same goes for the hatch. Right now, finding it is a rare race between the last survivor and the killer. It's not exactly the most exciting gameplay, but at least it's something. If it started appearing in the same spots, it would still be a race, but a much more predictable and unforgiving one, because it would basically come down to who's closer to it at the moment the second to last survivor dies. The only way to get rid of RNG in these mechanics without ruining the game is to rework them into something completely new. I don't have a clear vision for how that could be done with totems yet, but I do have one for the hatch. I've already shared it in my video about the history of the hatch, so if you're interested, check it out after this one. As for the non-RNG factors, the devs definitely need to take a look at map size and shape, since they have a major impact on Killer's gen control. Take Cold Tower for example and compare it to Shelter Woods. Shelter Woods is much bigger, which is very good for survivors because it means the killer will take longer to move between gens. Now compare Shelter Woods to Azerov's resting place. Both maps are roughly the same size, but Azerov's has a very well-defined choke point in the middle. That's good for killers because it makes 3genning survivors extremely easy. The solution here is obviously to standardize map size and shape. That said, I wouldn't go too far with it. The idea of all maps being carbon copies of each other doesn't seem that exciting to me, so it still keeps some variation between them. Next, main buildings. I already mentioned that some of them can be super big and hard to navigate. Often such buildings have a stupid amount of pallets and windows, to the point that catching a survivor there might easily take minutes. If a map has such a main building, its balance will always lean in the survivor's favor, even if it's not very big. A good example would be Dead Dog Saloon. The main building there is so unbearable that any killer with half a brain will never step inside unless they're absolutely sure they've already won the match. On the other hand, you have main buildings like the one on Azerov's. It's so small and underwhelming that even if you replaced it with a random jungle gym, no one would notice. And even if they did, they probably wouldn't complain much, because some jungle gyms are actually way stronger than that building. Just like with map size and shape, I'm not trying to push the idea that all main buildings should be absolutely identical, but we definitely need to narrow the gap between them a bit. On top of that, it would be a good idea to tweak tile safety on certain maps. For example, if you go to Batham Preschool or Gideon Meat Plant, you'll notice that regardless of RNG, they have an absolutely ridiculous number of so-called God pallets. These are pallets that are so safe that when survivors drop them, the killer physically can't get them unless they break the pallet. On Batham there are always 5 of them, which is about 1/3 of the total number of pallets. On Gideon it's even worse. I'm probably exaggerating a bit here, but it feels like half of all the pallets on this map are God pallets. To some extent I can understand it. Those maps don't have any jungle gyms, so God pallets kind of take their place. But damn, it's atrocious to deal with as the killer. Every chase feels like you're a dog on a leash, eating one pre-drop after another. Other maps swing to the opposite extreme. For example, Trickster's Delusion, where most fillers are so short that survivors physically can't win them, even at 0 ping. That leaves them with no choice but to pre-drop them from 2 miles away and run from one window to another. And since windows are ridiculously strong on that map, the overall killer experience becomes about as miserable as on Gideon. Again, I'm not saying tiles on all maps should be the exact same length and shape. On the contrary, I like it when there's something different about them. It adds variety to the game and forces both sides to adjust their playstyle from match to match. The problem is the extent at which it happens. Right now, the balance definitely feels off. Another thing worth looking at is the tiles that spawn along map edges. If you look at classic open maps, you'll notice that most of the time is just random isolated rocks and walls, and if you're lucky, short 1x1 fillers and Z-walls. And that's a pretty big problem. Map edges are one of the most dangerous places for survivors. The outer wall severely limits their pathing options, making it very easy for killers to down them. To even stand a chance in this situation, you need at least a semi-decent tile that allows for some basic mind games. Unfortunately, that's not the case with edge map fillers and Z-walls. They're so obnoxiously short that even experienced players can barely loop them for more than 5 seconds, which is why they urgently need a buff. To the devs' credit, they've been working in that direction. For example, several years ago, they added some pretty solid edge map fillers on Auto Haven Wreckers. When they reworked Threat Forest, they placed some of the Z-walls in a way that now connects larger tiles. The same goes for Sanctum of Wrath, where a Z-wall can sometimes spawn on the way to the shack or one of the corner jungle gyms. On some maps, Z-walls are also slightly longer, for example on Nostromo and recently on the farm maps. Hopefully the devs will continue improving edge map tiles, and one day they'll be just as usable as their counterparts elsewhere on the map. One more thing that could really use some improvement is map navigation. Most maps in Dead by Daylight are built from the same repetitive elements themed around their realm, and that really hurts their gameplay. For example, on Tobal Ending, it becomes very hard to plan your pathing as a survivor. Everything there looks like a pink mess of plants and rocks, so half the time you can't even tell what you're looking at, a jungle gym, a filler, or the outer wall. It also sometimes makes it difficult to tell where you are on the map when you load in. For that, you need unique landmarks, but unfortunately besides the killer shack in the main building, there aren't too many of them. It's especially annoying when you're on comms with someone, because that makes it so you can't give your teammates accurate directions. Instead, you're forced to play charades to find each other. Indoor maps are the worst in this regard, because landmarks are even more scarce there, and the ones that do exist are often hidden behind walls, which makes it feel like you're stuck in the back rooms. That's exactly why Bhvr needs to slow down a bit on reusing the same assets when designing maps and focus on creating more unique tiles. My personal pain point is map color filters. They're different for each realm, making maps within them appear green, blue, brown, and so on. Overall, I don't mind it. I even think it looks pretty stylish. However, on some maps it makes it very hard to see important gameplay elements, such as auras, scratch marks, and the killer's red stain. For example, on the farm maps, they're all yellow and very bright, so everything just blends right into the environment. Sometimes it gets so bad that it doesn't even let me unhook my teammates quickly, because I just don't see where to go. And no, the new aura and scratch mark color settings don't really help. The options they offer are too pale, and so they end up blending in almost as much as the default ones. What's funny is that it wasn't always like this. Before their rework in 2021, farm maps were set at dusk, which gave them a more brownish tone. Because of that, everything stood out clearly, so I genuinely don't understand why the devs felt the need to change it. They basically fixed something that wasn't broken. To be fair though, we've also seen the opposite happen. Originally decimated Borgo had an eye-burning red filter, which made things about as hard to see as in modern farm maps. With the release of the D&D chapter, the devs reworked the filter and shifted it toward a cooler, more bluish tone, and now the realm feels perfectly playable. That gives me hope that it's not all lost for farm maps, and that one day we'll see Bhvr actually fix that horrible piss filter. There are plenty of other non-RNG factors I could talk about in this video, but I won't. First, because it's already pretty long, and I'm not sure even 10 people will make it to the end. And second, because I don't want to shift the focus away from RNG. Even if you take all the non-RNG factors combined, their impact on map balance isn't even remotely close to that of RNG. So if the devs want to start fixing their maps, getting rid of RNG should be their top tier priority. If you look at some of the more recent maps, you'll notice that RNG doesn't have nearly as much impact there. Sure, you still get some variations, like pallets shifting from one side of a loop to another, but the overall layout doesn't really change all that much. And that makes me wonder whether Bhvr has realized the advantages of fake spawns and started to gradually move away from their original full RNG philosophy. Or maybe that's just wishful thinking, and these are simply isolated cases with no real pattern behind them. Personally, I'd really like to believe it's the former.